Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, as part of the Teagasc and ICBF Breeding Week, I'm joined by Teagasc researchers Nicky Byrne and Alan Twomey to give an update on the Dairy Beef Index and insight into its impact in the future. We've heard a lot in the past 2 years about the Dairy Beef Index, Alan. What is the Dairy Beef Index?
So the Dairy Beef Index is a breeding index that is designed to identify beef bulls that are for the dairy herd. So dairy farmers can use the Dairy Beef Index to select their beef bulls that are easy calving, short gestation, but also have good beef merit that allow them to have a saleable calf. As well as this, it can be used by pedigree breeders that are breeding sires for the dairy herd. So they can use the higher Dairy Beef Index sires on their cows, and this would produce improve Dairy Beef Index in the national population for future generations.
You mentioned there the ease of calving and short gestation. What else is the Dairy Beef Index composed of?
So the Dairy Beef Index is really composed of two main parts, and like you said, one is calving and the other part is beef merit. So there's approximately a relative emphasis of 50% on both of them, where calving is your calving difficulty and your gestation length, and this allows the dairy farmer to have lower calving difficulty and also to have more days in milk, and that's why gestation is really important to the dairy farmer. But on the other side, you have your beef merit, and this includes carcass weight, carcass conformation, and also ensures that they're a high probability of reaching their carcass spec and conformation spec as true to the factory guidelines. So the index, so before the index was launched, it was always dairy farmers selected solely on calving traits because that's what was important to those. And I suppose that led to a decline in the beef merit of beef bulls being used, as you would expect, easier calving bulls usually would have a lower beef merit. But the Dairy Beef Index, as it's selecting for the two traits, calving and beef together, it allows to identify those outliers, those beef bulls that can actually have both attributes. So they're easy for calving and also have good beef merit.
And at farm level, is the Dairy Beef Index, is it delivering easy calving for the dairy farm, and is it producing a high carcass merit carcass for the beef farmer?
It is. So studies have been done on this, and they looked at sires of two different sire types. So looked at easy calving short gestation sires, if they were just solely picked on that, and also looked at a sire group that were picked just in the Dairy Beef Index. So these two cohort groups could identify what would have been selected in the past based on calving, and where your Dairy Beef Index is what we hope is the beef sires that will be selected going forward in the future. There was very limited difference in the calving performance of the two groups. So bulls that have usually been selected compared to these high Dairy Beef Index bulls, calving difficulty was similar and also gestation length was similar. But where the big difference was, where we saw was these high Dairy Beef Index bulls actually had much heavier carcass weight, younger days to slaughter, and also a higher conformation score. And it actually accounted to, if we'll say, take a beef farmer, if he had 20 progeny, it accounted to over €800 more profit or revenue, I should say, for the beef farmer if he had calves from high Dairy Beef Index bulls compared to bulls just selected based on calving traits.
That's great, Alan. And going forward into the future, what impact do you think that the Dairy Beef Index will have, or what will it deliver?
So I suppose it's as you said at the start, the Dairy Beef Index is only there now. It's going into its third breeding season that it's available for dairy farmers. So I suppose uptake is still, as it's a new tool, and with all new tools, farmers are a bit slow to uptake it. But over the years, I hope uptake increase, and you can see that this will come maybe, as we can see in the currently dairy farmers select really intensely on the EBI. So hopefully going forward in the future, they would use the DBI indexes and select as intensely in the DBI as they do in EBI. And also I'd like to see is pedigree breeders is really to focus more on this, and this is get the dairy beef index going, and to have sires coming into AI stations, coming in as stock bulls with being available on this higher dairy beef index. And I suppose finally, I suppose where the beef farmer would often find is that they don't have all this is all controlled by the dairy farmer. It's the dairy farmer picks the beef bull. But what I'd be encouraging is beef farmers to get involved with their dairy farmer. So get a relationship with a dairy farmer going from future years, ensure you'll buy the calves, but also be involved with the selecting of the sires, so that the dairy farmer can select sires he's happy with, but also that the beef farmer is happy with the calves that he will get going forward. So I would really encourage that beef farmers would be proactive and ensuring that they're demanding these calves from the higher dairy beef index sires.
Some very interesting points there, Alan. And Nicky, to continue on from what Alan has said, what impact can the dairy beef index have going forward in your opinion?
Yes, Catherine. I think the dairy beef index has been a great development and allows the identification of bulls with a balance of traits, to bring about greater integration of the needs of both dairy and beef farmers. And really the beauty about the index is that it would allow the identification of the most appropriate individual bulls rather than, traditionally picking breeds of bulls for use on the dairy herd. And that's going to be really important going forward, identifying, a wider range of bulls to suit a wider range of systems. And that'll help, flatten out the supply curve of when dairy beef animals become available for slaughter. And that is especially important, to complement our seasonal calving systems that we have in place in Ireland. And, over the last number of years since the introduction of the dairy beef index, we probably have seen an increase in insemination and calf registrations of a wider range of sires with, growth in many breeds that wouldn't have been traditionally used on the dairy herd. And also, as Alan was saying, and it's a really important element that, the dairy beef index will help influence, the next generation of stock bulls on farms. And that's going to have, probably will have some of the biggest effect on improving the overall quality of our national dairy beef herd.
Nicky, you touched on it there really with the farm systems. Will the dairy beef index have an impact on farm systems going forward?
Yes, I think, and when in conjunction with sex semen usage, I think that we will see, the dairy beef index really, help reduce the number of purebred dairy males available for our production system. So that'll mean that we've, higher value, higher carcass merit beef bred animals coming forward. And really, when both of those are combined with sex semen, we'll see that, some of these beef bulls can be used earlier in the breeding season. And that, that will help support higher carcass output systems. Also, if we can get a higher proportion of beef calves, they'll bring greater, farm system efficiency in terms of feed, carcass, and probably at younger ages of slaughter in comparison to purebred dairy males. So the index will help us identify beef bulls that'll suit dairy breeding programs from the very start of the breeding season.
You highlight there some of the system efficiencies such as the feed and carcass and younger age of slaughter. What traits are important into achieving these high performing systems?
Yeah, I suppose every farm is different and different traits will mean different things to different systems. So it's very important to study the sub-indexes, see what is important to your farm. But regardless of the system, I suppose all cattle are priced on the Euro grid system. So a strong emphasis on carcass conformation, to counteract that generally poor conformation from the dairy influence in these animals, that is going to be really, really important. And that's going to be really important, to allow animals fully avail of the bonus and quality assurance price systems which are in place. And Alan touched on that earlier. That is another component within the index, the bonus component, to try and achieve an animal that produces a carcass, on spec. And generally what we need to see is animals that are, grading better than O- on the grid to avail of full quality assurance and breed bonus payments where they are available. So really, carcass conformation is number one to increase the value of every kilo of beef, very similar to our fat and protein in a milk pricing scenario. And then when we look at carcass weight, it's also really important, but we have to ensure that we have adequate conformation to maximize the price of each kilo, and then we can use carcass weight, to maximize the overall value of that animal and dilute down our cost of production as well as the emissions that are produced, and really achieve systems that are high output per animal or high output per hectare. And high carcass performance, it must come on the back of an animal that is feed efficient. And that is reflected within the index in terms of the feed intake sub-index. And this is especially important, to dairy beef animals to counteract that relatively high intake, poor conversion efficiency into carcass that comes through from the dairy influence. So really the progeny of the animals selected for these traits must be able to fulfill, that potential from a grass-based system and utilize grazed and conserved forms of grass, over a relatively short lifetime of 19 to 24 months. And really the index, is developed on the back of that type of system and should help to identify the appropriate genetics to perform within it.
I suppose, Nicky, given the traits that you've highlighted and the sub-indexes that they're really related to the finishing animal and maximising value to the carcass, are calves with a high dairy beef index, bulls, are they worth more a purchase then?
I think Alan touched on it a little bit earlier on. He said, the purpose of the index is to create a more saleable calf. And I'd certainly echo that's the real objective of it, is to produce a more saleable calf that's going to be capable of delivering for the farmer who takes the risk in purchasing him and bringing him through to slaughter. So really the focus of the index should be to increase calf quality and the potential of that calf to deliver profit for the rearer. And really, if we can improve that calf quality, that'll help secure custom, at an early stage in the calf's life, to take pressure off labour, housing facilities on dairy farms by getting them moved off farm at an earlier stage, and to be able to do this, without much variation within year or across years in terms of the demand for your calves. So really, beef farmers need to insist that nearly all beef calves are of a high genetic merit and from sires that have a high dairy beef index, be it from AI or stock bulls, rather than adding a premium on calf price. This should be looked at more so as a minimum requirement.
Finally, Nicky, what is your research in Teagasc grain shown in relation to the dairy beef index?
Well, I suppose our trial in Grange, the current study, was put in place, prior to the launch of the dairy beef index. But if we just look at some of the animals that are enrolled in that study, and if we look at the top 8 bulls versus the bottom 8 bulls in that study for dairy beef index, we can see that there's a €30 difference in their overall dairy beef index. But when we look at the carcass performance, carcass value of those animals from the high and low dairy beef animals that we have, we can see that there was probably a 13 kilo carcass weight difference between the higher end of the scale of the dairy beef sires versus the lower end of the scale, or that equated to somewhere in the region of €50 difference in terms of carcass value. So really, the overall dairy beef index takes into account what it's worth to the dairy farmer as well as the beef farmer. But just from that simple exercise of looking at them, we can see that there is an advantage overall in those higher dairy beef index categories in terms of carcass performance.
That's great, Nicky. Thanks very much, Nicky and Alan, for joining me on the show.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Good to be on.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Nicky and Alan for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.